Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Korg Wavestation tutorial series. Today we're going to take a look at the secret sauce of the Korg Wavestation, which is the wave sequence. This is really the fundamental heart of the synth and what separated it from its competitors in 1990. The idea of wavetables had existed for decades before they were actually invented in the 1950s, and there was a reasonably successful series of synthesizers released by PPG, primarily their PPG Wave in 1981, but Korg took it to another level with the Wavestation and introduced a musicality to the idea of wavetables that really hadn't been seen before. Today we're going to take a detailed look at how they work, and if you enjoy this episode, check out my Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. It's an awesome way to help support me so that I can carry on making these videos. Now for today's video we're going to use the Cascade Falls preset. We saw this in episode 1 of this series. It's a handy performance to choose because we only have a single part, and inside that part the first of the 4 oscillators is a wave sequence denoted by the asterisk as we've previously seen, and if I click the loudspeaker symbol we can solo that sound. So now we're going to hear a single wave sequence. Let's have a listen to it. That bell sound that we hear at the beginning of the note is very different from something that happens later. We're clearly hearing a sequence of sounds here. Now we're going to enter the wave sequence editor and figure out how all of that works. Now we're going to be using the graphical interface quite a bit today, so let's maximize its value. Click the little plus symbol to zoom in to the point where we can see each one of the sounds in the wave sequence. We can also scroll up and down this list and you can see that there are 9 entries in the list. If you select any one of those sounds, let's select step number 3, then that step is highlighted in the graphical editor. So let's have a more detailed look at how this sequence is built. I hold this note down and you hear that bell-like sound last for quite a while. That's because step number 1 has a duration of 80. I'm going to click in that 80 and drag it down. And now that bell sound lasts for much less time. I can accomplish exactly the same thing from the user interface by clicking the little square in the middle and dragging it to the right. Let's change that sound in slot number 1. There are 2 different ways that I can do it. I can click on the number itself, and if I drag up and down, I'm going to scroll through the waveforms that are common to all of the ROM slots. Remember that all of the ROM cards, they have 32 wave sequences at the front and they're unique to each ROM and RAM. Basically every memory bank has 32 unique slots at the beginning within which the wave sequences are stored, but slots 33 and onwards are effectively common, and what we're doing here is scrolling through them. So the lowest number I can go down to is 32, which is soft EP. And then you can hear that merging into the rest of the sequences. You can also change the currently highlighted step by clicking the list button. And this is further proof that 32 is the lowest we can go to, but we can get all the way up to 515. I'm pretty sure, although I've not seen this written anywhere, that VS stands for Vector Synth and is a reference to the Prophet synthesizer that many of these sounds will have come from. So here are all of our different sounds. Let's pick the ticker sound and say OK. And now that's in slot number 1. That was a very short transient laden sound, and then you heard a large section of silence. So if the waveform is basically done, if it's a transient based waveform and its duration is less than that specified in the sequence, then there will be silence until you fade into the next sound. Let's get a longer duration sound. Good. Now let's have a look at crossfading. Let's pull this value up and down, and as we do we can see the way that the sound's going to morph, the sequence is going to morph from wavetable entry number 1 into entry number 2. And there's also a hard limit. We can't go past the next waveform, so we have to get through step 2 somehow. Here's step 3 over on the right hand side of this, what's now a vertical line. So the crossfade does have limits and it won't let you go past them. And then we've got some fairly self-explanatory values for level, semitone and fine tuning. So this is going to be the respective volume of each of the sounds within the context of the overall patch. Don't forget, this is a single sound a single oscillator inside the patch, inside the performance. So there's all of these different levels. So this is just your internal mixing of all of the sounds inside this sequence. But if we slow down these first 4 steps so that they're all of a fairly reasonable duration and zoom out a bit so that we can see what we're doing, now you'll hear more clearly the tonal jumps for steps 3 and 4, and I think step 5 goes up to 24 semitones, 2 octaves above where we started from. You hear those 3 octave steps. When everything's merged together very, very quickly, you very often don't get this, you don't catch this stuff, but there is actually quite a clear tonal progression between those sounds. What this means is that it's possible to build entirely tonal-based sequences using the wave sequencer. I'm going to go back up to the patch level and overwrite this wave sequence with another one. Let's go into the list editor for the wave sequence itself, and I'm going to select entry number 27, drops. Now we'll head back into the sequencer. So you can see all of the values inside the wave sequence have now been overwritten. Everything else at the patch level is completely identical. I've just overwritten the wave sequence in oscillator slot A. So here we have a 14-step sequence, and you can see that they all use variations of these mute guitar samples, but they're going to be played at different octave ranges. Got 0, +12, 7, -5, some more +7s and +5s in there. So we're going to get a tonal sequence. So what's determining the speed at which that sequence is being played? Well, actually, it's the tempo of my host sequencer. If we jump up to the settings page at the top, and we have a look at this option called Wave Sequence Sync, this is currently set to on, which means the Korg is slaved to Cubase. My tempo is currently set to 110 BPM, so that's what we're getting. I'll leave it synced for the moment. We'll have a look at unsynced later. In synced mode, 6 duration steps equals 1/16th note. So basically each cluster of 3 steps in this sequence is going to equal a quarter note. What this actually means is that we're going to get some pretty unusual timing if we're synced to the host tempo. Let's try this out. I'll create a 1-bar loop, and I'll draw in a single note. Get my click track up and running, and let's listen to what that sounds like. So it is synced, but it's synced out of step with the standard kind of 16th register because you're getting 3 notes inside a quarter. In other words, we're counting in triplet time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. There's an easy way to bring these timings into step with the sequence. Let's say you want it in straight time. I'm going to select step number 1 and then scroll down to the bottom and hold my shift key down and select step 14. So I've basically just selected all of the steps. Now I'm going to change the duration. I'm going to click on the number and drag down to 6. And now let's hear that sequence. So it's in straight time, but there are only 14 beats inside the 16 beats of the bar. So you're getting that little stutter at the end, which sounds really cool. If you want to lock your duration editing to quantized steps, you can using the snap feature. It defaults to off, but if I set that to 16th and click and drag in the durations, now I jump up in groups of 6. So now I've just set it to half speed. So I'm only getting through 8 steps of the sequence before the new note trigger comes along and restarts that sequence. I'm not hearing the final steps of the sequence anymore. Let's fix that by making the note twice as long. So I'm now getting 2 new notes of the next sequence before it re-triggers again. Let's turn this into a 16-step sequence so that everything fits neatly into our 2 bars. There's no button or obvious indication of how to do this. It's actually on a right click We're going to right click, we're going to select the step that we want to insert the note into, and then we're going to right click. But just before we do, have a look at the values that we have in steps 1 and 2 at the moment. We've got mute guitars 1 and 2. They've both got a duration of 12 and their semitone offsets are 0 and 12 respectively. The reason I mention this is because when you do an insert, you get a really weird combination of steps 1 and 2. We're going to inherit the sound from step 2, but the semitone offset from step 1. Furthermore, the duration is going to default to whatever the snap currently is. Completely bizarre. Let's have a go and see what happens. So here's the new step. We've inherited the sound from the previously selected step 2, but the semitone offset from the preceding step, and our duration has defaulted to 1/16. Let's set the snap to 30 seconds and insert another note. Here's the duration 3, and we've got a new mute guitar here. I'll just fix these durations. Because my snap is currently at 30 seconds, I'm jumping up in steps of 3. But we're not quite done yet, because even though we now have a 16-step sequence, we're still only looping around the first 14 steps. So the step information on the right-hand side is now important. Let's have a quick look at this. Start step is set to 1, and you might think, why on earth do I need to specify that? It's because you can actually set modulation sources, we'll have a look at that in a little while, to make the sequence start at values other than 1, but that's its default. We're just moving forwards at the moment. You have the option to go forwards and backwards. Start and end are really pretty obvious, and end can never be longer than the sequence itself. So if you click in 14 and drag up, we can set to a maximum of 16. How often do we want this loop to repeat? Well, infinitely. If I click on inf and drag down, you can see that the value for 127 is basically being overwritten with infinite, but we can have a specific number of repeats. And we'll specify a couple of different semitone offsets for those new steps that we created. We'll have a -5 and a +5. And now we've got a full 16-step sequence in straight time. And you can hear those 2 steps at the beginning of the sequence. We've already seen the duration node, which is the one in the middle. The node at the top of each step is the level. You can see the level for step 3 going up and down there. And the node at the bottom is the crossfade. If you want to temporarily hear any individual step, let's say I want to hear step number 7, you can press this little solo icon. Now for some reason, I'll just switch over to my mix console here, because solo plays the volume, plays the sound back at full volume, which is really loud at regular volume. Come out of solo mode and we're back in selection only mode. Let's say I change my mind and I want to get rid of those 2 steps that I've just created. I can select step 2 and then I can press the control key to multi-select. I can actually scroll anywhere in this list and individually select or deselect. I'm just pressing the control key here. So I have granular control over each one of these steps. Once I've selected the 2 steps I want to get rid of, right click, delete, and they're gone. You don't get a warning or anything, so make sure you really want to do that before you actually click the delete button. When I deleted those 2 steps, we only now have a 14-step sequence, and so the end has been taken care of for us. Now let's detach this sequence from the DAW completely by disabling Wave Sequence Sync. Now these durations have an approximate time equivalence. One single duration step is worth about 24 milliseconds. The Wavestation doesn't give you the ability to input specific times, so you basically just need to salt this to taste. A step of duration 24 is equivalent to a BPM of about 105 BPM, but as I say, just basically work this stuff out empirically. So now if I get the sequence running, there's no connection between the Wavestation. I've just increased the BPM of the host DAW to 165 BPM. It's not slowing down or speeding up the sequence at all. I almost always sync my plugins to the DAW. It's just the way I prefer to work, so I leave this sync on. Well, that multi-select trick with your shift and control keys also works in the graphical editor below. So if I hold the shift key down and select step 10, then it selects that range of steps. Finally today, let's have a look at connecting modulation sources to the sequencer. Now for this demo, I want to reload the Cascade Falls performance from scratch, but I actually can't at the moment. If I double click on Cascade Falls and head back into patch mode, you can see the edited wave sequence is still there. In fact, even if I reload a different performance and then reload Cascade Falls, that still doesn't do the job. If you ever want to completely reset a performance back to its default state, what you need to do is reload a separate performance and then make any edit at all. Then when you reload the performance that you actually want, it will throw all of those changes away and give you your real default performance. So the Wavestation kind of remembers its current default state, and it doesn't matter. Simply selecting a different performance does not overwrite that old memory. You have to make an edit to the new performance or the new setting somewhere. Anywhere in the performance at all will do the job. Really strange quirk of the Wavestation and a bit annoying, frankly. So here we are back at the Cascade Falls preset. I'm going to solo the wave sequence. There it is. Because we've got that really distinct kind of bell-like sound at the beginning, that's going to help me demonstrate this modulation source a little bit more easily. Now the default option that you see in the source and amount, this is what you'll see in your Wavestation, linear keyboard modulation amount 0. That effectively means that these settings aren't being used. If I increase modulation amount to anything other than 0, and it goes up to 127 at the maximum, basically now each key on the keyboard is going to adjust the position in the wave sequence that we start from. This is where start step becomes significant, because you're no longer going to hear the first step of the sequence, and it's going to depend entirely on the pitch of the key that I play. So I'll randomly select a C. What am I playing here? C3. I've chosen a new start step. Control click to set the modulation amount back to 0. There's my first modulation amount. So I'm just choosing different points in the sequence from which to start. So it's a combination of the pitch of the key that I'm playing plus the modulation amount. It's a little bit easier to see what's going on if I switch the modulation source to the modulation wheel. So here's my mod wheel. You can see it in the interface. I'll turn it all the way down and I'll set a modulation amount to maximum, which means I'm operating over the entire range of the sequence. Now watch what happens when I press pretty much any key on the keyboard. That's the first note of the sequence, but we never move past it. The modulation wheel is now in complete control of the passage of the wave steps, not the timings. The duration have effectively been overwritten at this point, and I use the modulation wheel to step through the steps. Here we go. Okay. Bear in mind also that we're still subject to the overall envelope of the sound. So if I hold this key down for long enough, the sound is going to fade away because the underlying envelope for the performance has an envelope that fades over time. It's got a very long decay, and as you can see now, I had to carry on kind of basically filling time while that sound faded away. I've still got the key held down, but it's getting quieter and quieter. So we're still subject to the overall settings of the patch, in this case the amplitude envelope, but the modulation wheel allows us, while all of that's going on, to step through those wave sequences at whatever speed we want. And that'll do us for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please hit like if you did. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you again. Thanks a lot.